Hi everyone, this is Holly Odinsky here to do my discussion leader assignment on Chapter 10, Assessing Vocabulary by David Beglar and Paul Nation. So I'm assuming we all have the article and we've either all read it or have access to it. And I'm going to walk us through the article using both my reading guide and my infographic. So I'm just going to jump in and start right now because I've already recorded this several times and I'm trying to save time. So assessing vocabulary. The words you will need or the necessary vocabulary to talk about vocabulary is lexical, which I'm pretty sure we all already knew from English 620, but lexical means pertaining to vocabulary. So anything lexical is related to vocabulary. And then word families, words that are related because they have a common feature or pattern, and then frequency levels. So frequency levels come from frequency word lists, and the most typical frequency word lists that you will hear about are the British National Corpus, the University Word List, and the Academic Word List. I'm sure there's lots of others, but those are the ones mentioned in the article. So basically, these lists are what determine low frequency and high frequency words in English. Before we start, the question I'd like us all to think about is how you assess vocabulary in your classroom currently. I know we all have different contexts, and for me, being in foreign language currently, I assess vocabulary formally and informally every single day. So it's very important to me. I do it in a number of ways. So just kind of, I want you to think before you start, what do you do for vocabulary? So to start in the introduction, the authors mention this quote that I added because I thought it was very important. Lexical knowledge is a crucial and arguably central component of communicative language proficiency. Basically, saying that without vocabulary, you're not going to be able to produce or receive your L2 proficiently. So, and I wholeheartedly agree with that, again, as a foreign language teacher. So, vocabulary is needed for language reception and production. The authors mention three main areas of vocabulary assessment. So throughout the article, we see these three pop up over and over again. So the first one that they discuss is receptive vocabulary size and the subcategories of written receptive and oral receptive. So that includes what you receive, aka what you hear and read. So oral is what you hear, written is what you read. So there's that vocabulary size. The other area is productive vocabulary size. And in this particular article, they only subcategorize written productive. There is also spoken productive, but again, it's not really mentioned in this article. The last and third area of vocabulary assessment that the authors mention is depth of lexical knowledge, and we will discuss that further in the presentation. So to begin, we'll start with receptive vocabulary size. That is what the authors start with as well. Receptive knowledge normally precedes productive knowledge in both L1 and L2. I thought that was interesting. So basically, you learn to read and listen before you learn to speak and write in any language. Receptive vocabulary size is crucial in academic contexts because it is how learners gather their new information, and learners who are unable to comprehend oral and written texts are at a disadvantage in terms of access to information. And I believe both of those bullet points kind of go together in a school setting. Basically, if ELLs are unable to have academic vocabulary, they're not going to be able to do well in their classes. So again, vocabulary coming up is super important. And lastly, an 8,000 to 9,000 word family vocabulary is needed to achieve 98% lexical coverage or unassisted comprehension of a written text, which is quite a few word families and also a lot of words. So to be able to understand a written text without help. So jumping in, the authors give us a bunch of examples of tests, and so I kind of put them in this chart formation. I give you the name of the test, who came up with the test, and then I have under the green check marks pros and under the red X's cons, at least ones that were mentioned in the article. So those are not my opinion. And in the essence of time, I am just going to describe each test, but I am not going to go through the pros and cons myself. I'm just going to let you read those. So the yes/no test is by Miara, and it's a combination of real and non-real words. And you tick the words that you know the meaning of and don't know the meaning of. Literally, you say yes or no that you know them. So here's the example they gave us in the text. Literally just a bunch of words. You either say yes, I know that word, or no, I don't know that word. Pretty simple test. The next one is the vocabulary levels test by nation, which is also one of the authors of this article. And the vocabulary levels test looks like this from the article. And the vocabulary levels test measures at different levels of word frequency, hence the word level. You match short definitions, so it's multiple choice, and the distractors have no semantic relationship with the correct answer. So that makes it a little easier. That means lower proficiency students would be able to take this one still. Since the distractors are not related, it would be easier to pick out the correct answer. The vocabulary levels test I want to mention was from 1990 because then Nation came up with yet another test, the vocabulary size test, and that one is from 2007. So the size test is a little newer, but by the same creator. And the vocabulary size test looks like this from the article. The size test uses the first to the 20th thousand word families. So it is far more in depth than the original or any test that preceded it. And these word families come from the British National Corpus of English. And this time, the distractors do share elements of meaning with the correct answer. So it does make it more difficult. In this case, um, it may be more difficult for lower proficiency students to take this test because it's more difficult and the distractors are more related. So it gives you a context, but the context doesn't give it away, and they're supposed to choose the meaning of the answers. Again, multiple. So those were the three tests that the authors mentioned for written receptive. Then there's oral receptive, so aka what you hear or listen to. So according to the authors, a 6,000 to 7,000 word family vocab is needed to achieve 98% lexical coverage or unassisted comprehension of spoken texts. So it's less than the written, but still quite a few word families needed to comprehend without help. The authors do find it important to mention that very little empirical work has been done on this type of testing. So I thought that was interesting that not a lot of research has been done. So the two tests that they mention are the dictation test by Fountain and Nation and the oral lex by Milton and Hopkins. So the dictation test is exactly what we all probably already know it is. It's literally just a dictation. It is read once to the test takers and they write what they hear. And so here's an example of that one down here. Literally, they are read a dictation, the test takers write, and then the underlined words are from frequency lists and they're tallied. So basically, how many words they tally from each frequency list is a part of their score. Then there's the oral lex test. So the oral lex test is the same as a yes or no test, but it is heard instead of read. So exactly like the yes or no test again, only instead of reading these words, they would hear them. And you would just say, yes, you do know the meaning, or no, you don't know the meaning. From there, we go to productive vocabulary size. So this is what you produce, what you speak and write. So the authors mentioned that higher proficiency second language learners and native speakers use a wider variety of vocabulary and more low frequency words, which I think is kind of common knowledge, but it also just points out again the importance of vocabulary. And they also mention that productive vocabulary is key in speaking proficiency. Oral disfluencies, or what makes people unable to be understood when they speak, can be attributed to lexical errors. So I thought that was interesting to throw in there. So the written productive tests that the authors discuss are the Controlled Productive Vocabulary Test by Loafer and Nation, the Lex 30 by Miara and Fitzpatrick, and the Lexical Frequency Profile by Loafer and Nation again. So the Controlled Productive Vocabulary Test provides a meaningful sentence and the first few letters of the target word. So I think there's an example of this one. Yes, right here. They give a sentence, they give the first few letters, and you're supposed to obviously figure out that this blank or what goes in the blank is the rest of the word opportunity. So this test is obviously looking for production because the test takers have to fill in the rest. They have to write, they have to produce. However, I do want to point out that the con to this test that the authors mention is that this test could also be considered receptive testing because they have to understand the context of the sentence to be able to produce. So it's not just productive testing, I don't believe, or the authors don't believe. The next test is the Lex 30. It's a word association test. So they get 30 keywords from the first 1,000 high frequency words, and you have to give up to 4 responses or words that you associate with the keyword. So I'm just kind of finding that one. They are asked to produce up to 4 responses to each keyword, and each response that is not in the first 1,000 high frequency words is awarded a point. So basically, the more low frequency words, the better, and the higher score. Then there's the lexical frequency profile. This one is a written composition, and so not only is it probably a little more difficult, but it's also considered a diagnostic test because other things can be tested in a composition besides just vocabulary. So quite a bit going on in the lexical frequency profile. I thought it was interesting to mention that no tests assess, they didn't mention any tests that just assess oral productive vocabulary size. There's a couple of them that they mentioned in the article that can be used for spoken productive, but they don't actually give any tests that are just for spoken productive. So just written productive was mentioned. Lastly, the last main area of vocabulary assessment is depth of lexical knowledge. And basically the difference, I find it interesting, well actually necessary to point out that the difference between vocabulary size, which was the last few tests, and depth of lexical knowledge is this quote right here according to our authors. The primary meaning of learning the primary meaning of a word precedes the acquisition of further knowledge about the word or placing the new word in a semantic network. So basically knowing the meaning of a word is vocabulary size. And being able to use that word, say, within sentences or within context is depth of lexical knowledge. So being able to do things with that word, not just knowing the meaning. So the 3 tests that they talk about for depth of lexical knowledge are the word associates test by Reed, the vocabulary knowledge scale by Wesch and Parbacht, and the vocabulary networks, or the V-links by Miara. So the word associates test gives a target word, 8 options, and 4 of them, and actually here's the example right here, 4 of them are semantically related. 2 are paradigmatically related, which basically means they are like synonyms, and 2 of them are syntagmatically related, which means they can be put together to make meaning. So in the example, they give sudden, and the 2 on the left, which are paradigmatic, are kind of like synonyms, so quick and surprising. And then the 2 on the right that are syntagmatic, they can go with sudden to make meaning, so sudden change and sudden noise. So that's the word associates test. The vocabulary knowledge scale is they get new words from a reading text and then they self-report. So here's that example right here. They can give it a 1 for I don't remember having seen it, a 2 for I have seen it, but I don't know what it means, etc. So you can kind of go through that list. And they self-report on each word. The vocabulary networks test is using vocab as a network. So basically you organize words in the test into word families and things like that. There's not a lot done about that test, not a lot of research, so there's not a lot of information in the article about that one either. So lastly, I'm going to kind of hurry through this. Okay, the authors mentioned that classroom vocabulary, that I found it interesting that there wasn't a lot more information about classroom assessment, but here's what they basically told us. The first 3 bullet points are what teachers should know classroom vocabulary assessments are used for, and the second 4 bullets are what just classroom teachers should know about assessing vocabulary. And I thought that's important for us, so kind of read through those on your own. And then lastly, the authors give us future research on vocab assessment. Again, they say we are not done researching vocabulary assessment, and here's where we need to improve. So I gave some of these in my reading guide, but here are the rest of them. Basically talking about we need to know more about this, 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 and this. And one that I thought was interesting was that the computer delivered in adaptive assessments. In this day and age, you would have thought we've already had a lot of computer delivered and adaptive assessments, but apparently that needs to be researched more. Finally, I'd like to go through 2 discussion questions, and I'm pretty sure these are the ones that will be posted to the discussion board, but I want you to think, were any of those tests, did any of them strike you as usable in your own classroom? Which and why? And then which area of vocabulary assessment do you think is most important and why? So receptive, productive, or depth of lexical knowledge. Which of those is more important to you in your classroom or in your context, and why? And that concludes the presentation. Thanks.